They don't come here to attack us because we're rich and we're free. They come and they attack us because we're over there.
We don't need to go populist left or populist right. We don't need to embrace neo-Marxism or neo-fascism, these disastrous movements from the 20th century. Turns out the answer is pretty much our Bill of Rights, our story. Embrace freedom. That's the answer.
And if the LP has a purpose, it's not to put people to sleep. It's to wake them up.
We're here because we love liberty, and we're here because we hate injustice. We are here to save mankind. We are here to fight.
Join us, the Libertarian Party, in perhaps the most exciting, grandest endeavor in history, the restoration of American liberty.
Ideas spread, they can't stop them. An idea whose time has come cannot be stopped by any army or any government.
Hello and welcome to episode 90 of Decentralized Revolution, a podcast from the Libertarian Party Mises Caucus and Mises PAC. I'm Aaron Harris and I'm your host. I think you're really going to enjoy today's episode. Every once in a while, there's an episode that's just a little bit better than all the rest, and it's always because of the guest. And my guest, Jordan Gambrell, was just really great to talk to. He is the founder, chief content producer, and editor over at Operation Libertas. They're at operationlibertas.com. And one of the things they focus on is foreign policy and war, and that is because of Jordan's experience and kind of why he moved toward being a libertarian and wanting to speak out on things. Jordan's a Green Beret. I think once you're a Green Beret, you're always a Green Beret, even if you're retired or not in the Army any longer. So he is a Green Beret, and he's a former captain in the US Army. He was deployed to Iraq, Turkey, and Syria. He was in for 9 years. He was in Syria when ISIS was still holding territory over there. And he talks about his experiences over there and just a really moving sort of description of one of the events that happened that made him to really start questioning what war is and why it happens and who it benefits and who it doesn't. So he kind of describes what happened, how his thinking started changing, and what he decided to do about it. And one of the things they do, I want to tell you about, just so when you hear him, you'll hear it again and maybe you'll act on it. They over at operationlibertas.com, they sell copies of Scott Horton's Enough Already, which is a great book if you have been living under a rock or you're new to the liberty movement. Of course, Scott is one of the best, if not the best, libertarian voice we have on war and foreign policy these days. And Enough Already is a book basically talking about the U.S. involvement in the world from around the Jimmy Carter administration up until now. So basically my lifetime. And he really breaks down, why these things happened, what the effects were. And Jordan was greatly influenced by Scott's thinking and reporting, and also, what you read at antiwar.com, which Scott is, of course, involved in. And so one of the things that Operation Libertas does is they sell the book, and then when you buy a copy, they arrange to have a copy given or placed in a place where active duty, current military personnel will pick it up, either by handing it to them directly or leaving it somewhere. And he's gotten a good response from that, kind of replaying what happened to get him thinking about these things. And I really enjoyed our discussion on this. And I think it's something we need to remember as libertarians, even though we're very, very anti-war. And I think that's the number one issue, kind of hand in hand with central banking. I think we have to be wise about how we approach people and about how we talk about this issue. There's sometimes when you really need to light somebody up and call them out, and there's other times when you need to plant seeds and get people thinking about, okay, what exactly is going on here? What's my role in it? And Jordan has a real thoughtful approach to that, because that's kind of what happened to him. So I really think you are going to learn a lot from this episode. Before we get into it, I want to remind you of a couple of things going on with the Mises Caucus. We just launched a webpage called runaslibertarian.com, and I'll link to that on the show notes page at decentralizedrevolution.com/90. And it's basically, if you are a candidate, or if you've been thinking about being a candidate for local office at the county level or below, well, I shouldn't say below, because it's actually more important the more local you get. So at the county level or smaller, or if you want to be a campaign manager, a really committed volunteer to help with a campaign for one reason or another. Maybe you don't want to be a candidate. I know if I ever did, my wife would skin me alive. So I'm not going to ever be a candidate, but I can help out in other ways. And so if you want to help out by being a campaign manager, and you're interested in getting some training and finding out how you can get plugged into what the Mises Caucus is doing with local candidates and campaigns, go over to runaslibertarian.com. Sign up. I think you have to, most people who do that, if we determine that you're not, for some reason or another, not quite in the right place, like if you want to run for state, U.S. Senate or something, that's really not what we're doing, I don't think. But anyway, go over to runaslibertarian.com, sign up, and you should be able to get some training. The Leadership Institute, I think it's called the Leadership Institute, is helping out with some of our training. Some of our in-house people who have experience in campaigns are doing some of the training. Amy Lepore is a board member, and she's in charge of our candidate and campaigns operation, and she's just doing a great job. So to get plugged into that, runaslibertarian.com. If you can't be a candidate, can't be a campaign manager, you can always support Mises PAC, because one of the big things we do with the money that people entrust with us is to find local candidates and winnable races and support them with direct campaign contributions, as well as we're really ramping up the training, the resources, funneling volunteers to their campaigns. So to do that, as always, go to takehumanaction.com, sign up for our email list if you haven't done so yet. And also at takehumanaction.com, you can become a monthly contributor to the Mises Caucus. Or if you don't want to set up a long-term, recurring monthly donation, which we like for you to do because that helps us budget. But if you have a little extra money and just want to do a one-time gift, you can do that as well. So please do that. Also, last thing, if you are not a member of the National Libertarian Party and you believe in Angela McArdle and the new crew that we elected back over Memorial Day weekend in Reno, you need to step up and join the National Party. I think it's $25 to be considered a sustaining member, or whatever the actual term is. That's important for two things. One, to just support the party and give them resources and give them numbers to do what they're doing. And also it helps your state get representation at the next Libertarian National Convention. So it's not based on like the Electoral College. So, Tennessee, where I'm at, has fewer electors than Ohio, where I used to be. But if Tennessee has more dues-paying members to the National Libertarian Party, then Tennessee gets more delegates. So we want our Mises people to be represented in those counts, so that the Mises, the states with the most Mises Caucus representation earn the right to have more delegates. So go to lp.org/join to do that. If you're not sure if your membership is current, or if you have other questions related to that, email them at info@lp.org, and they'll get you sorted. So do all that, get plugged in with the Mises Caucus, and enjoy this great episode with my guest, Jordan Gambrell. It's a pleasure to have you on. I wanted to thank you for reaching out a couple of months ago, saying you'd be willing to be on the show. And I've had several other people like, hey, I'll be on the show. And there's like not much there yet to talk about, but you've got a lot in your resume to talk about. And before we get into kind of some of the big stuff, I Googled you, and you had some pieces on Libertarian Institute 2.5 years ago now, right during like that first month of what I like to call the panic of 2020 plus. We're still kind of in it, but even in March, that first month, you wrote a couple of articles about the whole 15 days to stop the spread and all that stuff. And I'm going to link to those on the show notes page at decentralizedrevolution.com/90. And so I just wanted to, you nailed it right up front. And I want to give you credit for that, because it took me several weeks to fully figure out what exactly was going on. But you seem to have it right off the bat.
Well, first off, thanks for having me on, Aaron. I appreciate it. I would just kind of credit a lot of that to listening to people who are kind of smart, not necessarily just on like COVID or any one particular area, but just, being principled and, sticking to that and just kind of making common sense decisions. Yeah. It really kind of inoculates you from the propaganda. I remember thinking even before COVID became a big deal, and there was even before mentions of lockdowns, I remember hearing about this virus and just thinking like, man, they're going to use, this is going to be something that's going to be used as soon as they feel the need. And Scott Horton had some good points about it. He was like, he actually kind of had a different take. He kind of thought it was going to be a little more of a big deal, but that they pushed it to the side because in February of 2020, a lot of people probably forgot, but they were doing the whole impeachment of Donald Trump and everything. Yep. And it was like, his take was the news is going to push that. And then once that kind of dies down, then they'll shift over. But I just kind of saw it from the get-go happening. But, you mentioned the 15 days to flatten the curve. I still remember seeing all those graphs on the news as that was going on. And it's like, okay, 15 days to flatten the curve, but they always just talked about flattening and keeping the numbers down. But it was like, okay, there's another axis of this graph that shows it extending out over time. And like, isn't that also something to worry about? And nobody in their coverage of it ever talked about that aspect of it. Okay, we can flatten it, but that means it's going to take longer. And it just seemed like such an obvious thing that should at least be discussed. Mm-hmm. And everyone was just glossing over it.
I think that's it. I think people kind of thought, oh, well, 2 weeks, and then we do this, and this thing will spread out over like 3 or 4 months. And by Labor Day, we'll be back to normal, right? And so like, I think that's kind of the impression I had, and that other people had. It's like, oh, the first week or so, it's like, oh, it almost felt like they were setting us up like we were in an episode of The Walking Dead or something, because they're like, oh, you can have the thing for 2 weeks without symptoms. So basically people can be walking around with this. And so I remember, I went to check on my next door neighbors who were in their 70s to make sure they had food and toilet paper. And I remember like standing like 10 feet back from their door and all this. And everybody was like super nervous. And we're like, oh, okay, well, we can do this for a couple of weeks. And which means people will get sick for 2 or 3 months. We'll spread it out. They'll all get it and we'll be done. And then it took me a couple, 3, 4 weeks to realize that, hey, wait a minute, this is government doing this. And like my first instinct was weird things happen in the world. And, sometimes you just have to deal with it. But then the more and more I found out, then I was like, okay, I kind of see. And I just had Michael Rechtenwald on the previous episode here. And we kind of came to the same conclusion. It's like, well, whether it was like planned and intentional, or whether it was, a mistake that kind of accidentally got out of the lab, or whether it was something that nature did, government, as they always do, they took advantage of it and turned it to their purposes. So the fact that you were asking those questions a little before most people, you get, strong libertarian points for that, for having your radar up very, very early.
Well, I mean, that's great to hear, but I wish I could have actually done something to change more people's minds so we hadn't gotten to this point.
Well,
but then I guess, people opened up my eyes and allowed me to see it. So I guess it's happening,
No,
I feel like there's all these things like vaccine passports and everything that I really kind of credit, whether it's Mises Caucus or libertarians or whoever, from, even if people want to talk about Twitter warriors or whatever and like make fun of it, but I think there's something to be said about people online pushing back against these ideas, and even if it's only 10% of the comments or whatever, it's enough pushback that people are realizing like, oh, people are onto these things, and they're getting, even if other people aren't buying our whole message, we're putting out the idea that like, no, this is wrong. This, you're not thinking about this aspect of it. And it's giving people enough ammunition to be like, yeah, I don't know if I necessarily agree with everything, but like we should be pushing back against this thing. And that's a start at least.
No, and that's what, as libertarians, I think that our messaging, there was a lot of, like with Justin Amash's thing at the convention, and kind of the approach of some libertarians, which I'm not entirely opposed to, but practically, I think that some libertarians think, well, we need to be talking to like the average American voter and trying to market ourselves to the 100 million voters, right? Or however many, 120, I don't know how many voted for president last time. But like, to me, it's like, I'd rather try to get the 1 or 2 million people who are most adjacent to us to wake them up and to get our numbers stronger. So instead of 1 million libertarians, we have 3 or 4, and we kind of go from there. I think it's kind of not going to be an overnight thing, and people kind of have to make up their minds on their own. And I went through kind of a similar process on war and foreign policy, as you did, although from a completely different life circumstance. But it was one of those things where I was like a libertarian, like everything else, except I was like a neocon on foreign policy for a few years there. And then I just kind of started hearing comments, seeing this and that. And like, it just started tugging on the string of like, oh, wait a minute. If I'm a libertarian here, okay, that's the same thing as that. And I just started putting it together because of people being annoying online, so that's what we got to do. So let's go ahead and get right into a little bit of your background, what you're doing now, and kind of how you got from someone who was well, first of all, let's get into the, I ask bad questions because I ask like 6 questions at a time. Let's start by this. In the intro, I already kind of said who you are a little bit. First of all, the first line of your bio, Jordan Green Beret, former captain in the US Army. So explain what that is. I think some people are not 100% clear on exactly what a Green Beret is. So start with that.
Yeah,
how you got to be that, and what it is.
Yeah, a lot of times I tell people like I was special forces, and they were like, "Oh, so were you like a Navy SEAL?" And I'm like, "No, I was special forces. That's
right.
a specific thing." Which, yeah, special operations forces kind of covers everything from Navy SEALs to Rangers, Green Berets, but specifically Army Special Forces are the Green Berets. So I started in the military as an infantry officer, and as an officer, really nobody in the military goes straight into special forces. There's some programs for enlisted guys where they do go on a training pipeline and kind of go straight into that, but that's kind of rare. But as an officer, I started out in the infantry and I deployed to Iraq. And then after that deployment, that's when my opportunity to go to selection took place. And so I went, and basically with a bunch of other guys for 3 weeks, we went through this training where basically they decided if we were going to get selected to go on and do the Special Forces training, which that was another year and a half, 2 years of training before becoming a Green Beret. And basically, a lot of people, I think, what they would consider what Green Berets do is, if anyone's seen the movie 12 Strong, where the Green Beret teams that went into Afghanistan at the beginning, they met up with the Northern Alliance and they helped to use them on horseback and going right alongside them, dropping bombs on the Taliban, and that's kind of the bread and butter of what Green Berets do. Navy SEALs are a little more known for like kicking indoors and doing raids and stuff like that. Whereas Green Berets more get to.
Well, the concept is a force multiplier, right? That teams of like, what is it, like 12 guys, you put them on the ground somewhere to meet up with the local, the army or the resistance or whatever that we're helping. You train them up, you get them intel, you call in the air. Is that kind of, do I have that right?
Yeah, basically a 12-man team is supposed to be capable of training a battalion size element of a foreign nation, whether that's a standing army of a foreign nation or some kind of guerrilla force that we're training to overthrow a current government.
Right. So, so you did that. Let's talk a little bit about, because I from some of the people I know who come from that world, it's kind of a fascinating story of the selection process, both psychological and physical, what those recruits go through. And so talk about what that is and what the Army is, what are they trying to find? And, okay, we don't want you, but we want you. What are they trying to find in that selection process, and how do they do it?
That's a good question that I've asked myself a few times, because there's certain things that I don't necessarily know why they're picking certain things. Part of me thinks there's certain groups certainly that they're looking more for like robotic type of people, like, Navy SEALs and like Delta Force, or more they're looking for just like a robot who doesn't really question a whole lot. I would say with Green Berets, they are looking for people that are a little smarter, a little, maybe not. I will give Navy SEALs, they're tough as shit. They're hardcore. They may not always be looking for quite that. They need a little more well balanced, where somebody who's willing to question some things, because you're going to be put in situations where you can't just call higher headquarters if you have a question about something. You have to be the one to kind of make the decision on the ground. But at the same time, as we kind of discussed earlier with other people, that they kind of, I feel like a lot of Green Berets tend to have more of the mindset of us, where they do question authority a lot more. And that's not really what you want out of a soldier in the military. I personally, I think that is how it should be. We should be questioning that, so that we're doing the right thing, not just following orders that end to, endless wars, actually trying to win some of these wars. Preferably ones that we get into that are actually, legitimate.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, as far as what they're looking for, I think that's there might be like a bigger scheme of what the military thinks that they want, but like everything, it kind of comes down to the individual, whether the person picking. I remember sitting down with the guy who told me that I was selected, and he was basically going through a laundry list of things that he was like, well, you didn't do that good on this or that, but they were all things that I would have. It was like testing, like a psychological eval or IQ test that I don't know what the results are, but I knew physically, like in a run or a ruck, how I knew I finished in the top 10% or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
He was kind of leaving those things out. So I don't know how much of it was just a mind game to tell, like make me think I didn't make it, just to finally at the end tell me I did. Or maybe I did really suck at all these other things. I don't really know.
Now,
so
don't they do? Go ahead, finish what you're saying.
A lot of it is like they kind of mask what it is that they're looking for in a sense. Like you don't know unless you kind of been in a while and you're in that group of the
Right.
people selecting it.
And from I know a few people who have gone through selection, and a few of them who did see action in Iraq and or Afghanistan. And in that selection process, don't they, like, when you're like super tired, like wake you up in the middle of the night, or like after a big long thing, physical, then they'll like sit you in a room and kind of like give you this psych eval that's got all these weird questions, and like they're trying to see how you um basically how your mind works in all kinds of different stress situations and things like that, right? It seems it sounds very disorienting from what I heard of what that's like.
Yeah, I do think they're one thing they are looking for is kind of flexibility and like, okay, we want you to be smart and we want you to be strong, but we need you to come in and out of those two things, not
Mm,
just like, okay, for the next 3 days, I just have to be real strong and I can turn my brain off. You have to be able to switch it on and off as needed. You'll go from doing a 10-mile ruck march, and then later that day, you're sitting behind a computer doing some kind of IQ test or something, or you've
mhm.
taken a Scantron test over something. And it's all just kind of coming at you, not super fast, because you do have kind of a lot of downtime in between events, but you don't know what's coming next.
Yeah. So if I remember right, most of the guys, you are meant to have like expert language skills and at least one other language than English, and also they tend to have like a specific specialty on the team. Did I have that right? And if so, what was your language and your specialty once you qualified?
Yeah, so my language was Persian Farsi. So quite a bit of, especially guys scheduled to go to fifth group, were taught Farsi, which, for those who don't know, that's what they speak in Iran. Um, so that's kind of an interesting aspect there too, right? That we're not like at war really in any country where that's a predominant language, yet we're always preparing for whatever the DoD or the US government wants to kind of be prepared to fight next. So
Yeah.
that should be kind of telling. That and Russian was always kind of big, even though, up until Ukraine, why did we have any reason to be at war with them, right?
Right.
Um, and then as far as what my specialty was as the officer, basically I was going to go to a team and be the team commander. So my specialty was more in like planning and organizing and leading. But then you've got guys who are weapons specialists, communication specialists, medical specialists, and who am I? Engineering. Um, and then you've got an intel guy who's usually he came from one of those other specialties and he's moved up. And then every so basically you have 6 different jobs, but then there's basically 2 of each person. So you've got like a senior and a junior of everything. And that way you can always split into 2 teams if you
Yep.
need to and still have all those capabilities. And meanwhile, we're always kind of cross training each other. So the medical guys, teaching me how to do tourniquets and check, you know, blood pressure and check for injuries and how to treat certain things. And I can't do everything he can do, but if he gets hurt, somebody can step in and do his job to some degree.
Right. So the idea is to be able to be fully autonomous. Like you guys got no like UPS dropping off supplies every day. You guys are out in the middle of Syria or Iraq or in Pashtun territory in Afghanistan or whatever, and that's it. You have what you have, and you got to make do. And so that's kind of the thing, is that it's actually kind of it is kind of you know uh, incredibly interesting and difficult, and I think it kind of works well for, like, you talk about like the first 3 months in Afghanistan. Um, from my understanding, that whole model kind of worked exactly like they wanted to, right? Before we started putting tons of non-SF guys on the ground, they got a lot done in a very short amount of time with not too many guys.
really it worked even better because technically by the manual, that kind of warfare is supposed to take like 14 years to like overthrow a standing government and put in a new one and all this stuff. And it happened in like 3 weeks. And that's where it should have ended. It should have been like, okay, we had no beef with the Taliban. It should have been, go after Al Qaeda. And if there were Taliban fighting back, okay, maybe, whatever you have to do with them. But after 3 weeks being in there, like everyone should have been home by Christmas. And honestly, the Afghan people probably would have been fine with that because even the Taliban didn't want Al Qaeda there. There just wasn't much they could do about it.
Right.
They didn't really control the country like we imagine a government can control its country. And it wasn't until we started sending in all these, regular soldiers, and then they became targets. And there was actually David Kilcullen wrote a book called The Accidental Guerrilla, and basically saying how these Afghans, my grandfather fought against the Soviets and his grandfather fought against the Brits. And like, there's an invading force in my country. It's my duty to go. They didn't have any beef with America necessarily,
right.
At least certainly at the beginning. But now that there's this invading force, it was their duty to kind of fight back against it. Then after 10, 15, 20 years of killing civilians and all this, then there actually did have some beef against us.
Right. That's insurgency math, right?
Yeah.
You kill one guy and now you have 5 more enemies because his brother and his nephew and his son all hate you now. So,
yeah.
So this is a good time to talk about kind of your, the beginning of your journey to where you are now. And that's I'll let you explain what the motto of Army Special Forces is. And again, because some of the guys that that I know who went over there, one actually who didn't go over there because of circumstances beyond his control, is a hardcore Mises type libertarian now. But some of the other guys, like they were, like you said, kind of almost libertarian, certainly on the conservative side of things, had a healthy skepticism of government. I remember one guy, after he did his first tour in, I forget, because he did Iraq and then Afghanistan or vice versa. And he came back and he was like, we're never going to accomplish anything in that country. And it doesn't matter which country it was because he turned out to be right. He turned out to be right in both places. But he was just like, yeah, it's basically a huge government program and it's horrible. And yeah, it's not going to work. But like a lot of guys are attracted to special forces because of their motto and what they are kind of billed as their reason for being. So talk about that and your motivations for wanting to do it.
Yeah. So the motto is De Oppresso Libre, freedom for the oppressed. And I remember, learning about Green Berets when I was a kid even, and just thinking like how cool and kind of noble in a sense that was, going in it very blue-pilled, especially as a kid and not understanding a lot more behind it, but just thinking like, yeah, these guys are going in and they're trying to help the locals and learn what it is that they need and what they need to do to help defeat their oppressors. And always thinking, obviously if they're being oppressed, then obviously whoever's doing it's got to be the bad guy, and not learning more about, the stories and propaganda that are really going into selling these wars. But that all seemed really cool. And as we talked about earlier, all like the kind of cross training and how this 12-man team can be such a force multiplier and do so much more, that was always very cool. And I mean, even looking back on it, I just think like, man, if we had just kind of done what we should have done, maybe I never would have been red pilled and never, like we could have, like the American empire probably could have kept accomplishing great things as far as, from the empire mentality goes, if they had just kind of stuck to doing what was right. And I might not have ever had my mind changed as it is now. Like if in Afghanistan, if they had gone in and just like kicked butt and gotten out and that was the end of it, man, think about how like scared the whole world would be of the US. Like they got attacked on 9/11 and it took them 3 weeks to just go in and like eradicate this terrorist group and then get out, and everyone was celebrating before the year's end.
Right.
Like that would have other countries would have been like, oh man, like that's big and bad, and they did it with a small little force.
And they would respect us because then we left them. We did.
Yeah.
We did what is justifiable, and I'm a pacifist.
Like you defended yourself.
Yeah, you defended yourself. You went after the guys who actually did something to you, and then if we would have done it the way kind of the storybook way is like, oh yeah, we leave, we cut Afghanistan a check, say sorry that we broke a few things. Now go back to take your country back, right? But that's not what happened. So when you were in Syria, so start talking about, so you go into it with that. I think about when I was a kid, the G.I. Joe figurines that came in little bubble things, and on the back it had all their specialties and things like that. So that's what we learn as kids, that oh yeah, we're the good guys. And to be clear, a lot of these guys are great guys, but they buy this narrative, and then they are then used for ends that either they don't understand or that they come to understand, and a lot of them not be cool with. So you go into it thinking, hey, I've got all this training. I'm going to be doing this very difficult stuff, but it's for a really good reason. And you're highly trained. You're very good at what you do. Like, I can't stress enough, like the guys who do make it as far as you did are very accomplished in a lot of things. They're not just like tough guys who can shoot, right? There's a lot that goes into that, so that we have this great thing that we produced, going off to do this thing. And then just talk about your experiences from there, the mindset that you started with, and how long it took for that to start changing maybe.
Yeah, well, I mean, even pretty much right around the time that I became a Green Beret was beginning of 2015. And, that's the start of like Clinton, Trump. And that really was when I started being like, okay, I can't have anything to do with either of these two parties anymore. And I was always kind of saw myself as somewhat of, a moderate, like I'm going to listen to them both and see who's, best, before I realized that, no, they're both just terrible. So that's kind of, I was already starting to get into some of the like libertarian ideology and philosophy and all that, right around that time. And I already knew that, Iraq and Afghanistan were kind of a joke, and like, specifically Iraq, like we should never have been in there. Afghanistan, oh, maybe, we had a good reason to go, but we shouldn't have stayed. But I still, for whatever reason, I guess I just didn't know enough at the time. I still thought like Syria was like a justified thing, and we were there for good reasons. But I'd already started, before I deployed to Syria, I was already getting into Scott Horton and learning, just cracking the surface on what he knows about all this stuff. So I had like the seeds planted while I was there. And then while I was there, just things I saw, it was pretty obvious that like, this doesn't make sense, or this isn't right, like what we're doing. You hear, it's not that the US military like ever intentionally targets civilians, with maybe the case of what's his name was it in Yemen? And I'm drawing a blank on his name, but
was it the kid?
Yeah, the kid and his dad.
Anwar al-Awlaki. Yeah,
yeah.
I'll look it up and put it on the show notes page. But yeah,
with the exception of that, which was direct targeting. At least from my perspective, there was never any like, oh, these are civilians, we're going after them. There was a lot of steps taken to avoid it. But there's a difference between like if I just plucked you off the street and like put you in our little op center and said like, hey, tell us how we can do better at like avoiding civilian casualties, you would probably actually be able to look at it and say, well, this doesn't really make sense, because how do you know? Like, you don't know what you're actually targeting here. But when you're within the system and you've got military lawyers telling you, oh yeah, as long as you hit this criteria, this is like a legal, legitimate target, And then you've got these intel guys telling you like, well, we've picked up this intel here, here, and here. So, it's likely that this is enemy, blah, blah, blah. But it's kind of like the whole reason we have trials, right, is because sometimes people are innocent and it's just some factors made them look guilty or something. And so when we're running all these operations and we're gathering intel, we're not sitting down and having like a full blown trial and letting the guy like defend himself beforehand. We're just dropping a bomb. Even if we're right, even if he was, planning some terrorist attack or he was planning to attack our base or something, well, that doesn't get rid of the wife and kids that were laying in the room with him too.
Yeah.
And so none of it is like we're directly targeting, but it's happening all the time. And the time that it first dawned on me, like, we don't know what is inside these buildings that we're hitting. Is we launched a strike, all our criteria was met for everything, and we watched the round punch a hole through the roof of this building, but it was a dud. It didn't explode. And a few seconds later, you see like 15 women and children come running out of the building. And you're like, if that had gone off, everyone's dead. They're not running out of the building. We have no way of, we would have never known. So every time we did a strike and it went off, we didn't know who else was in there. We have to make sure that there's not women and children in the area, but that means we're doing these strikes at night. Women and children are inside sleeping at night.
Right.
So that was the first time it was like, all right, let me think about all these things that we're doing here. Like, we can say we've checked all these boxes and legally our hands are clean, but that's all a bunch of BS, really.
Was that going on inside your head, or were other people talking about that?
I don't think anyone else was talking about it. One, I mean, I think your average person, even in that situation, is probably like, "Ooh, we dodged a bullet on that one," and aren't thinking, how many other times did this happen? Or a lot of times when you see the feed and you see the building get exploded, people are like, hell yeah, we got them. And I'll admit, like, the first couple times we did that, I was kind of like that, like, hell yeah, we got them. But then as you do it more, and that was my primary, I wouldn't say it was my primary job, but I was in charge of all the operations for our company. And so I was coordinating a lot of these different assets. So just about every strike we ever did, I saw and had a piece in it somehow. And so I was seeing it probably a lot more than the other people. Yeah. And again, I had just that grain of Scott Horton, information, and Dave Smith kind of red pilling me to start questioning things enough to where maybe that was the only reason that I really saw into it, is because I would already kind of knew some of these things aren't right. Our government's lied about these wars before.
Yeah.
Maybe that's all that it took. I don't know.
So set the scene a little bit. So when you got to Syria, what was going on? What were you told that you were trying to accomplish, and why?
Well, I'll have to back up a little bit, because that deployment started with me actually going to Turkey for 3 months, and I was right on the border. Mm-hmm. It was just me and 3 other guys from my team, and we were partnered up with some forces from the Free Syrian Army in northwest Syria. So this was kind of an area where Green Berets had recently gone in with the Free Syrian Army and kind of cleared out an area of ISIS. And that was big for Turkey, because Turkey kind of wanted to keep the Kurds off their border, and it kind of put a wedge between these two Kurdish groups. And so that was kind of my area of operation for a little while going into it. And then we kind of closed that mission down, and I met up with the rest of my team and my company in Syria. And so at that point, it was we were finishing up, we as in like the US military in Syria was finishing up operations in Raqqa, which was basically just bombing all of Raqqa. Anybody that moved was basically considered ISIS. And that was the last like real stronghold for ISIS in Syria. So the next 3 months of my time in Syria was us focused on kind of the remnants that were down south of us. There weren't really any stronghold areas. It was just kind of cleaning up the last like bits of ISIS. So that was what our goal was. But then a further objective that my battalion commander told us directly was there's oil fields down here. And so we need to basically secure those so that we can use that as a bargaining chip against the Assad regime to create, whether it's some kind of federated system in Syria or whatever, it basically would be a bargaining chip. And we know how the U.S. military likes to go into countries and protect oil. So.
Really. I think I know some of this, but I am not going to trust my memory of Scott Horton's book. So at the time, ISIS held a lot of Syria and a lot of like Western Iraq. And so the U.S. was operating over there. The Assad government had part of Syria and ISIS had the rest. And so the U.S. was trying to eradicate ISIS, but they weren't working with Assad, right? Am I
no? And so Assad and Russia were basically fighting ISIS too, just more to the west and the central and southern area, and we were really just in eastern Syria. But then, you're right. In Iraq, Mosul was the big like ISIS stronghold, and that was more in western Iraq. So basically, everything from western Iraq to eastern Syria was basically ISIS held area. For a while.
Yeah. So just talk a little bit more about how we don't have a whole lot of time left. I could literally talk to you about this all day, but like, so you're over there, you're describing, what you're doing. You had the close call. While you're over there, can you still get podcasts? Are you still listening to Scott and Dave while you're over there, or is it just seeds that were planted before you got there?
It was really just I could have. I was working like
you were
20-hour days.
I would think there wasn't a whole lot of time, but like sometimes I like to fall asleep with podcasts, so I didn't know.
I mean, but I wish I had Scott Horton in my ear, because as I read his book, and I don't know what he knew, at that time, but everything I read, he would have been the best intelligence source that I could have had, because as I read back on things, I was like, oh, that's why this was happening. That's what, my own command either didn't know or wasn't informing me, because they have their own secrets they're trying to keep.
Yep.
With going back to when I was in Turkey was one of the first gas attacks that, Assad supposedly committed. And come to find out, the CIA was saying, yep, this is 100% was an Assad attack. And then I'm reading in Scott's book, and he's talking about how, well, the DOD actually did its own investigation, because they were like, we're not really sure about this chemical attack. And then they find out like, oh, these are all things that were not part of Syria's like arsenal of chemical weapons. This was something that was actually funded by Saudi Arabia and given to al-Nusra, aka Al-Qaeda. And so it was like, oh, well, that's, that would have been really good information to have known at the time, but the DOD wasn't about to inform me of that. They are perfectly fine keeping me, who's on the ground, like I'm the first one getting reports of a chemical attack, and they don't want to let me know, like, what's the backstory of all this. They're perfectly fine letting me, you figure it out. And if it happens to work out in our favor, where now we get to stay, because also remember, this attack happened like days, if not like a week after Trump was like, yeah, we're getting out of Syria.
Right.
Conveniently.
Yep.
And so, Scott I wish I had been listening to more of his podcasts at the time, or I wish I had just had him in my ear.
Yeah.
Because it would have been, I'd have been better at my job, honestly, because I would have known more.
Well, I mean, that's kind of the point of, that's how government works, right? They only tell you what they want you to know and what you need to know to serve their purposes. And so wasn't there at times like like you said, the DoD did something. So like the CIA backed guys were doing this, and the DoD backed guys were acting at cross purposes, right? So like even they don't even tell each other what they're up to half the time.
Oh, there was actually a time where I forget which way it happened. I believe DoD backed forces attacked CIA backed forces in northwest Syria. Um, which is it's funny because literally the two sides that we're supporting were fighting each other, but also our own side can't coordinate enough to be like, hey, these are our guys. Hey, these are our guys. We're kind of in the same area.
Yeah, that's um, that is pretty mind-boggling. So talk about there's I would imagine there's a long process, but I do want to give you plenty of time to talk about Operation Libertas and what you're doing now. So go ahead and take us on that, however quickly you want to get us from what you started seeing and thinking about while you're still on the job there in Syria to where you are now.
Yeah, so I mean, I got kind of I knew I wanted to do something in the liberty movement. I didn't really know what, and even 5 years ago, I didn't know half of what I know now. So I just knew that I wanted to do something to help further the cause of liberty, because as I was finishing up, a 9-year career in the military, ostensibly joining to help spread and promote freedom, I was realizing there at the end that nothing I had ever done, nothing that anyone in the military has done for decades has done anything to promote liberty, whether it's here at home or in another country. So I really wanted to focus on that and actually kind of live that special forces motto of freedom for the oppressed. And so basically my goal with Operation Libertas is just to work with any organization who's going to push an agenda that's focused on liberty, whether that's a single action thing that I can work with one group one time, or a group like the Mises Caucus, who is kind of, that is the overall mission, is to spread the freedom and liberate people within our own country.
Yep.
So I'm glad that you had me on, because that's my goal, is to work with anybody I can to help promote these ideas and spread the message.
So what exact kind of organization? I know from with our stuff with the PAC and all that, you got to pick what type of organization you are and how you can raise money and what you can do. So what is your group actually doing, and what do you want to be doing, and how can people help?
Well, I'd say the biggest thing we've done is both through donations and people buying copies of Scott Horton's book that I sell on my website. We were able to give a bunch of free copies away. So one, that's just promoting a great book and a great person in Scott Horton, but also just great. I mean, more people that read and understand the full history of, like, the war on terror and everything. More people, both left, right, center, middle, up, down, are going to realize, how wasteful all these wars are. And so for every copy that I was selling, I was able to give a free copy away. But on top of that, what we were also doing is a lot of the free copies we were giving away, we were linking up with active duty guys in the military and being like, hey, I'll send you 10 copies. You just leave them around your base, leave them in the chow hall, leave them at the staff duty desk, just leave them laying around for guys to kind of pick up and read. So it's a little bit of a, inside operation to try to change the mind of the guys in there. Because honestly, a lot of them, as we kind of touched on earlier, a lot of guys join for these reasons. They just don't realize the truth behind it, and kind of opening their eyes up. A lot of people are, if not have the same general idea, they're very much adjacent to those ideas and want to spread liberty. They just need to realize that they're in the wrong organization to do that.
Yeah, one thing I have seen and noticed, both in the group of friends that I've referred to a little bit, but also in other guys, it seems like the typical military guy that I've run into seems a little more likely, if not a lot more likely, to really want to do his own research. Like, I think it comes to a point where you're doing something, you kind of want to know more about it. And most, even guys who like aren't libertarian that I've met who are in or have been in the military, like they've done a lot of reading and they know they know what they believe for the most part. I think some of the, like right when you get in, you don't, but after a while, it seems like people do really try to educate themselves. And so I think that's awesome that you're getting them stuff that, you know, even somebody who's coming at it cold and may completely disagree, I think they're probably more likely than the average American to look at a book and like, oh, maybe I'll check that out. Right. So have you gotten good response from people? What have you been hearing of people um, who have been exposed to the book or what you guys are doing?
I mean, most people, it's just they're kind of blown away by just all the information. I mean, most people who are even going to crack open the book are already kind of like-minded, but or know a lot of the kind of wave tops of these ideas. But as they read it, they're just like, I mean, people actually have told me that like I got mad. I threw the book across the room, not because I didn't like the book, but because it's just infuriating to learn the truth and what we've been doing, and all the things that it could have. It didn't have to be this way. You know, it could have been avoided. It could have just ended before. So people getting mad about it, but also, you know, they go back and they pick the book back up after throwing it across the room and they keep reading and they learn. And then the biggest thing is they pass it on to somebody else. I've had a lot of people who are like, I'm doing a free book giveaway, and they're like, hey, I've already read it, but you know, I'd love to give it to somebody else. And I'm like, hell yeah, I'll give it to you. If you've already read it, go hand it to somebody else, put it in a little free library somewhere, you know, just get the word out.
Yeah, that's great. Let's see. I still have tons of questions. So, did you, something I read in what you were, I think it was in your stuff, or maybe it was something else. Talk about a lot of guys who are in SF, they become contractors and things like that. Did you ever do any of that? And talk maybe a little bit about the role that um, those guys play in, because there are a lot of guys who are in working alongside the guys who are still actively in the Army, right? That um, uh, sometimes things are done by private uh, companies, right?
Yeah, so like I never did any of that. But while I was in Syria, I mean, we had a ton of civilian contractors that, whether it was like they're maintaining this piece of equipment or they're going to install this one, or all these jobs, really the goal is to just keep the troop numbers down. You know, that we can only have X amount of soldiers in Syria at this time. Like, okay, so we'll just get rid of this military job and put a civilian contractor in. And so the same jobs being done still, you know, by an American. But then now we've just freed up basically more guys like me that can be more on the front lines or dropping bombs and stuff like that, and just freeing up some of these other jobs. That's a lot of what I saw while I was in. And then I've had some buddies that have gotten out and they've gone and they're like, yeah, I'm going to go sell weapons to the Saudis. And I'm like, really? Like that clearly doesn't have the same kind of mindset that, you know, we do.
Right.
Because they're fine going and doing that and making six figures off of it. And like, all right, I just hope you can sleep at night, which they probably can because they're not aware of these things.
Well, and they got plenty of money to buy nice mattresses and pillows, right?
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing that, you know, Scott Horton calls it the self-licking ice cream cone, that the defense contractors, you know, get involved in this. And so for every contractor they have doing something, and the guy on the ground, maybe, I mean, some of those guys make pretty good money. They probably been making a couple $100,000 a year, at least some of them. And then, so that guy gets paid that, but then Northrop Grumman or Titan or whatever, who is actually employing him, they get like double, right? Because those guys cost a lot. They keep the numbers down of the official troops, but on the ledger books of like the money that's going out, that stuff, there's a whole lot of people who have an incentive to do it that way because it's pretty lucrative.
Yeah. There's a javelin, the javelin missile system, or at least the rocket, is like a $30,000 rocket, or maybe it's more than that. It might be like $75,000. And the saying is that, this rocket costs more than the guy firing it makes in a year, and he's shooting at a guy who won't make that in a lifetime.
Yeah.
And that kind of sums up the military industrial complex and the American empire's war mentalities. We're just going to war with these poor countries just to really ingratiate the defense companies.
Yeah. And I hope this doesn't seem like a downer, but like I think it's important. Like, and you may have some experience of people that but like we still hear. I don't know how current the statistic is about how many vets commit suicide every day, and of course, any that you would have to look at like the average how many of non-veterans commit suicide every day, but like it's still, I think it is certainly a problem that guys who and it's more so the things that they see and they're asked to do rather than the stuff that happens to them, I think. But so there's so many guys who are exposed to stuff and have such a hard time with it. And I'm just glad that you were able to find a good way to and I hope I'm not being presumptuous or whatever, but like to do something productive with that experience that has left a lot of other people a lot worse off. So like, is there, I guess I'm, in addition to helping what you guys do, like what can we do to help people who are maybe in that situation where they have seen some action and are struggling with it? Like, are there things we can do if we run into somebody like that? What do we say? How do we talk to them in a way that's not going to make them feel worse, but to try to help them out, I guess?
I mean, it's tough because, I've, not that I was, at that building that I described earlier to see, these women and children come running out, but I saw it on a feed, and that in of itself, has affected me. And I think how many other people, did I have a hand in? And so, I have my own, sins to atone for, I feel like, but I know there are a lot of other people who, they were face to face with death and killing. And I think a lot of what gets them, I think people probably could maybe get through that easier if they really did know it was for a good cause, or, they were helping, they saved somebody else or something. But I think the more and more people are seeing how we're handling these wars, they're seeing that it is kind of for nothing. And that's where the real despair, I believe, kind of comes in, where it was like, it was for nothing. And so as far as what can you do, every individual is going to be different, and how they handle it.
Mm-hmm.
I think even somebody who's really having a hard time with it, it might be hard for me to relate to them and know exactly how to talk to them. I guess just, if they're a family or a friend, just let them know that you're there and willing to talk if they want to. But more than likely, they're probably just going to want to talk to another vet or somebody that has kind of been through that before.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, even in our community, people will still sometimes say, thank you for your service, blah, blah. Personally, I hate when people say that. I know it's coming from like either a good place or well-intentioned, but to me, my reply, I just want to be like, what? I didn't do anything for you or for anyone else. And so personally, that's something that kind of bothers me. So I don't know how you approach somebody who may not even want to talk about these things to somebody who can't relate and can't understand. Unfortunately, I don't have a very good answer for you. Whereas I would just say, if it's a friend or a relative, just let them know you're there if they do want to talk.
Yeah.
And you just have to be, it seems obvious to say, be open-minded, but realize like they might have done some terrible things and feel terrible about it. and try not to judge them for those things. If they do decide to sit down and talk to you about it, they're probably going to tell you some pretty dark things, and they're probably leaving out a lot of details.
Yep.
So just, I don't know, have patience and try to understand it from what they've gone through.
Yeah, I think as libertarians, and I think when I first kind of the flip switch for me, and I became anti-war, like I think I maybe came on a little too strong sometimes, and because I think I and it's the same way with like talking about cops and stuff like that. Like I have sympathy for like those guys are people too, and there's a small minority of people in those professions that they are like psychos, right? That they are really, really bad people. But for the most part, most of them are well intentioned to some degree and are conflicted and don't. So to me, I always want to be careful to like respect that person, even though I may, because I don't know his personal what he did or his culpability or anything like that. And as a Christian, like it's not for me to judge that person. I do want to speak out against war and against a lot of the 98% of what the cops do, but also you want to try to have compassion for the people, because ultimately we want to convince people to, hey, we want to stop people from going into the military, and we want to stop politicians from voting for this. And so it's a hard thing to balance, to support and be good to people who are struggling with something, but also be very firm on, hey, this is the reason. It's a hard thing to say, but the reason so many of these people are having problems is because they're serving a system that is corrupt and doing bad things. And so I think that what you're doing of trying to get the message out there, and especially to people who are, you're not beating people over the head. You're not chaining yourself to fences at the defense base or something like that. You're just trying to expose people to the truth and letting them, their minds and their souls take them where they need to go. So I think sometimes that's all we can do, is just speak the truth and try to be nice to people, and hopefully that'll change some minds, I guess.
Yeah, that's something I'm always working on too, because you get on Twitter too much and you're just talking smack to everybody, which has its own purpose, but then you kind of come back to the real world and you got to realize, like, all right, I got to kind of calm it down a little bit. I got to explain this thing to people, and they may not like it, they may not even understand, they may not agree, but you got to just try to get that message across and try to get the truth out. And you never know, it's not always the person who you're talking to. Sometimes it's the people on the periphery, whether that's in the comments section or in real life. It's not always the person you're talking to that you're convincing. It's the people around who are listening and being quiet, and they're not saying anything, but they're taking it all in and they're hearing both sides. If your side is correct and right, more people are going to come to your side.
Yeah, that's the thing is, I think that's a thing that I point out a lot too, is like when you're engaging someone, whether in a conversation or on Twitter or something, like you may not be able to, most of the time, you're not going to be able to convince the person that you are locking horns with. But if you conduct yourself the right way, the people who are watching, they're interested enough to see what's going on. And if you conduct yourself with the, speak the truth, but also try to be as compassionate while being firm at the same time, I think that has a chance to win some people over. And even the people who resist, sometimes the people who resist the strongest, the liberty argument or the peace argument, those are the people who are already struggling with it, right? Because it's hard to give up on something that you believe very strongly, that you've been taught is right. You start to question it, and it's like, oh, am I going to give up? And especially for somebody who's been, who was maybe at the level you are, like that's a huge part of that guy's identity. And to all of a sudden at age 35 or whatever, be like, oh, I need to be a different person. Like that's a real heavy thing. And so, so not everybody's gonna take calmly to the change that is starting to happen in them. So,
yeah, I mean the Scott Horton rule of like attack the left from the left and the right from the right. That's huge, but also just, and I think he says this too, meet people where they are. I gave a speech at Revolution 2022, and one thing that I wanted to try to convey to that younger audience was it's basically like little pivot moves. In basketball, you're on one foot and you pivot on the other foot. And so you just meet somebody where they are and see what they're kind of comfortable with. Once you can kind of find some common ground, all right, pivot to that topic and try to convince them. And then once, they're kind of convinced of that or agree with you on something, then maybe you can pivot to another topic. But you're not going to just grab somebody and throw them to the other end of the court to convince them of your way.
Yep.
It's not going to be easy. It's going to be little fights here and there, little wins.
Yep. One last little question before I let you, tell people what they can do to get in touch with you and everything. It's been a long time. I had, I think Dan McKnight, Defend the Guard, what they're doing, which is basically trying to get bills passed in the states that make it more difficult for basically to enable the governor to say no to if the feds want to call them up, the National Guard guys up, or I always get Guard and Reserve mixed up, but the troops that are under the control of a governor, that if there's not war been declared, then the governor can say no. That's one decentralized way that we can fight the war machine thing. What do you think of that? And are there other things that we as the Mises Caucus could be telling our candidates and maybe trying to recruit candidates who would run on that to help the war thing at a local decentralized level?
Yeah, I think the Defend the Guard legislation is huge. Unfortunately, I think we just need to be pushed in more states. I mean, there's a few states where it seems like it's really kind of gaining some traction. I don't know if it's actually passed anywhere yet, but it's gaining traction in a few places, and we just need like almost a full court press. Like that should be happening in every state, and it doesn't need to even just be a Mises Caucus or a libertarian thing. Like you got to kind of figure out what your state's like, whereas, in Tennessee, maybe that's something that you should be able to convince Republicans of here. And maybe that's something like I talked to a legislator in Maine, and she was a Republican in Maine. She was like, any idea I bring up, it's not going to work in Maine because I'm, the opposition. Right. So in Maine, maybe you have to work with the Democrats to push it, and you should be able to find people there. So every state, even every local area, I mean, yeah, it's something that needs to be passed on a state level, but your local politicians, especially if you're in a bigger city, maybe they're the next people getting ready to move on to, state level positions. Maybe start getting into their ear while you still can, and start thinking about that longer game too. I know preferably we'd all like, the government to just go away, but while it's here, play their game as much as you can. Kind of, my Green Beret mentality is coming in, and act as an insurgent, get in with the local ones that you can, especially if you see somebody that might be a riser, even if you don't agree with them. If there's somebody who's going to be making some moves, if you can convince them of something like Defend the Guard, and then they can take that on as they move up, that could be a win. We'll take the wins where we can,
And then even so much as just getting to know, and it sounds like a civics class thing, but like if you can somehow establish a friendship with a city councilman or a DA or whatever, like that, if they do move up and they know you, like build that relationship. So when it comes time to lobby them for something, they're like, oh yeah, Jordan was a good guy. I remember talking to him at that. I'll at least listen to him. I'll sit down with him, and again, you never know what your personality can help put across. And so that's why, both as whether you're going to be a candidate or not, getting to know the other people who are running for things and establishing those relationships can, and in some cases I've heard they do pay off. There have been some things that the crew, I'm still fairly new to Tennessee, but they've established some good friendships and working relationships, and have got a lot of things done. Not on the issue we're talking about yet, but hopefully one day, right? So
yeah.
Tell everybody, if you're watching this on the on your screen, you see your Twitter handle there, Op Libertas, OP Libertas. That's you on Twitter, obviously. How else can people get in touch with you? Do you need people to do things? Do you need money? Just give the pitch to so people can help you out.
Yeah, check out my site, operationlibertas.com. If you go there /shop, you can buy a copy of Scott Horton's book. Every copy I sell, I'm going to give another free one away too. Or if you just want to donate, let me know either on there, hit me up on Twitter. Basically all the money I get for it is just going to send out more copies of free books. If I run out of books, I'll go to Scott and ask him to, see if I can buy some more from him. So yeah, right now, that's the biggest way you could help, is that I want to get that book into as many hands as possible. He's got some other books coming out. We might have to ramp up for a new one. But yeah, other than that, just follow me on Twitter and you'll see all my bomb tweets out there, throwing them at the establishment.
Right. And so get in the comments and pick a few people off, bring them over to our side, right?
Yeah.
So, all right, Jordan, I really, this is, I really could literally talk to you for another 4 or 5 hours. And I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate it.
And there you have it. I'd like to thank Jordan Gambrell for his time and wisdom, and for his service to liberty. I really admire the arc his life has taken and is taking, and really impressive guy on many levels, especially for just what's gone. You can tell by listening to him what's gone on and what he's committed to, and I'm proud to say he's in the movement with us. If you want to find out more about Operation Libertas, how you can help out, how you can buy a copy of Scott Horton's book so that an active duty service member will be exposed to a copy, go over to decentralizedrevolution.com/90. Thanks to my co-producer, Simon Kalpin, and thanks to Dave vs. Goliath for all the music you hear on Decentralized Revolution. And as always, thanks to everyone who subscribes to our email list and gives to Mises PAC over at takehumanaction.com. And thanks to everyone who shares, rates, reviews, and subscribes to Decentralized Revolution. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.